I like big lenses, and I cannot lie. You other tubers can't deny. When a dude walks in with a lens like this, with that element in your face, you get pumped. The 400mm 2.8 and other lenses like it, such as the 300mm 2.8, 500 f4 and 600 f4, and the 800 f5.6 lenses are often called super telephoto lenses, or just the big boys. So why would anyone buy a massive prime lens like this when cheaper zooms exist? It all comes down to speed. Not that you're going to be going anywhere fast with this hunker, but it's all about the speed of the lens. And with this being a 400 2.8, it makes it the longest f2.8 lens available for Nikon, not including the Bigma. So if you're heading out to do any wildlife or sports photography, these big lenses allow you to get higher shutter speeds using their faster apertures, allowing you to freeze action, particularly at dawn or dusk when the light is failing, or in sports venues where you've got dimly lit arenas. Now, I've never done that, but I've heard it's a reason why you would buy one of these big boys. Or if you want to shoot at the same shutter speed, you can drop your ISO considerably in those conditions, allowing you to get a much cleaner image. And no matter how good cameras get with ISO and how sharp zooms get, you just can't beat physics. More light is always better. So I've had this 400 2.8 for about a year now, and when I took it out of the box, I realized right away that when you step up to this kind of class of lenses, Pandora's box opens, and you're about to be set back another 1,000 quid on top of the cost of the lens just to be able to use it. So the main issues with these lenses is the size and weight. Now you might just think, oh, it's just a big lens, but it crosses the threshold in bulk to where special consideration is actually needed when using one of these big boys. You know, lenses like the 70 to 200 2.8 and the 200 to 500 f5.6 are kind of at the top end of the size range for normal lenses, but they will still fit in normal camera bags. And can be handheld easily for longer periods of time with like normal usage. But once you step up to one of these big boys, hell opens. So this 200 to 500 is 2,300 grams. Now it's nothing to sniff at, but this 400mm is 4,600 grams. It's just over double the weight. Now, this particular 400mm is actually the heaviest version Nikon ever made. The later E version is a petite 3,800 grams. So when it comes to actually utilizing one of these lenses and moving it around, it is so much more difficult than just picking up this. Like, this just feels comically light in comparison to this, which I'm struggling to lift one-handed. But with all this weight comes a 2.8 aperture, which is 2 full stops brighter than the 200 to 500 zoom lens, which allows you to bump the shutter speed for the same ISO, or you can bring down the ISO for the same shutter speed, which makes a considerable difference in certain shooting situations where you want that extra speed. This shot of a line was actually taken at blue hour and at ISO 9000 at 1/100th of a second. Now, this shot would not have been possible without a lens like this, because it would have required me pushing the ISO into the stratosphere. So a lens like this is a very, very useful tool once you get used to using one. So with these big tele lenses, you can't even handle them normally. Instead of, mounting the lens to the camera, you mount the camera to the lens. Then once you have the camera mounted, you have to be very careful not to lift the lens with the camera, because the weight of this beast hanging off the front can deform or even snap the mount clean off. You always carry and hold these lenses by the tripod foot when you're walking about like this. Now, for some reason, Nikon likes to put the biggest, dumbest, non-Arca Swiss tripod feet on these lenses, so it's often a very good idea to buy a third-party one to save space and sanity. Next up, you're going to need a flexible lens hood and a lens cap. Okay, you don't actually need one, but the hood that comes with these massive lenses tends to be huge and bulky, so for your sanity, picking up one of these is a good idea. This is a Roland Pro one, that I found on AliExpress, and it works a treat. It also keeps the water off the front element when I'm watching lines in the rain. It's also a good buy if you bought your lens cheap and it didn't come with the original hood. So now that we have the lens in a usable state, we now need to transport it, and oh no, your camera bag doesn't have a hope of carrying something this stupidly big and heavy. So now you have to go buy a brand new giant camera bag that can actually handle the size and weight of this, while also being somewhat comfortable, or as comfortable as having 10 kilos of camera gear bolted to your spine can be. So this is the bag I use. It's the Mindshift Backlight 36 litre bag, and it's very good. So with the tripod foot, the hood and the new bag, you decide to head out with the lens, all happy until you actually try to use it and your arm snaps clean in half due to trying to hand hold a 5.5 kilo piece of kit. So when you get out of the hospital with a new arm, it's time to head to Amazon and buy a new good quality monopod that can hold this beast. I use this iFootage Cobra 2 monopod, which is actually really good. It also comes with this sweet tripod base that I can use on a desk as a mini tripod. I rate 8 out of 8. Great. So now that we're actually able to transport and shoot with this tank of a lens, we run into another problem. It's a prime. There's no zooming capability, and what if I need more reach? Well, then I guess I have to buy some teleconverters. So that's a TC14E Mark III 1.4x teleconverter and a TC20E Mark III 2x teleconverter into the budget as well. There is also the 1.7x teleconverter, but nobody cares about that. I'll talk about the problems with using teleconverters on this lens later on. Then you might actually want to use a polarizer on this lens to make the most out of midday shooting to cut the sun's glare. But these lenses use a special drop-in polarizer. That is because the lens doesn't have a filter thread, and if it did, it's way too far away from the camera to actually be able to adjust it easily. And also, no one makes a 6-foot wide filter anyway, so you have to go and buy the expensive drop-in one as well. So now that we actually have all the gear, we can actually go out shooting. That's boring as shit. Let's go to Kenya and get some real use out of this lens. how do you actually use one of these lenses efficiently? And it's quite simple. It all comes down to positioning. Because the lens is so heavy, you have to be able to predict what will happen and set up at the right spot. But that's incredibly hard to do. Now on a safari, this actually means having a top-tier driver who knows what's what. Thanks, Simon. Or you could just ignore all of this and lug the lens around with the monopod attached anyway. Now it's time to talk about teleconverters on these big boy lenses, because that is what these teleconverters are designed for. People do use them on zooms and other lenses, but they're truly meant for use on these big primes. A teleconverter is basically an optical group that fits in between the camera and the lens and acts as a magnifying glass to expand the image circle, giving you effectively a longer focal length lens. Now the most common ones are the 1.4x, which extends the focal length by 40%, so a 400mm becomes a 540mm lens, and the 2x, where it becomes an 800mm lens. Now this sounds amazing on paper, but the practice of this has some serious trade-offs. So when the image circle is expanded, it spreads out the same amount of light over a larger surface area, so the image gets darker. So for the 1.4x you lose one stop of light because square root of 2 is 4, and on the 2x teleconverter you lose 2 stops of light. So the f2.8 becomes an f4 or an f5.6 respectively. Also, teleconverters cause a loss in sharpness, which makes sense because as you're spreading out the image, it's going to become softer. And it can actually become a fair bit softer, particularly if you're using a high megapixel camera like the Z8, which really shows up any difference in softness at all. I find the 1.4x to be fine, but the loss of sharpness on the 2x can be a bit much on the Z8. But if you're on film or a 24 megapixel full frame camera, it would be fine. You know, the question you often hear being asked is it better to use a teleconverter or to crop? And this question has the frustrating answer of, it depends. But the general answer I would give to this is if the resolution of the camera is high enough to allow you to crop in while maintaining acceptable resolution of the image, it's generally better to do that than to use a teleconverter. Also, teleconverters affect the autofocus performance. Now on the Z8, all the converters worked just fine, but on the F6, it really struggled with the 2x to the point where it would just not autofocus a lot of the time. I actually had to manually focus the lens close to where it would need it to be, and then I would use the autofocus to fine tune it. This is a pain in the ass when it happens, and it's really frustrating. Lastly, swapping out teleconverters is a pain in the hole as well. A lot of the modern versions of these lenses have them actually built in and can be engaged with the flick of a switch. This allows the teleconverters also to be optimized for the lens, so the image quality issues are lessened quite a bit. As for the image quality, all of these super tele lenses have the best possible image quality for their time. You know, these lenses were made using the top tier tech of their time. So while this is a 2007 lens, it is easily able to handle a 45 megapixel digital camera. You know, the images coming out of it are as sharp as a tack with minimal chromatic aberration, and I was able to do some pretty serious cropping into those tasty Z8 files. Now, also this lens has VR, which allows us to handle any slow shutter speeds and my shaky hands after 3 coffees really well. Also, the VR is very handy when you're limited by the ISO in your camera because you're shooting film like an idiot, and your shutter speed has forced down quite a bit in order to compensate for that limitation, so having the VR is really nice for that as well. But the VR in this lens is an older type VR, it's not a miracle worker like the 200 to 500. The used market is where a lot of these lenses are starting to become accessible for mere mortals like us, where they can be had for a very good deal. Back in 2007, I believe this was about 12,000 euros new, and I got it for 2,000. And that's for the 07 version, never mind the eye-watering 16 grand needed for the Z-mount version with the built-in 1.4x teleconverter. I did actually get to try that lens at the Nikon Plaza in Tokyo, and it's awesome. Having that flicking teleconverter action is just so useful. I'd love to own one, but you know, money. Even though this lens is the older GVR version of the lens, it is still fully compatible with the FTZ adapter, so I can use it on the Z8, no bother, or any Z-mount camera. It also works on any digital F-mount camera, But it also works on the f6 properly as well, which allows me to shoot film with this beast, which is really nice. And it's actually expanded the kinds of pictures I can take. And because I love photographing animals, it actually suits me down to the ground, this lens. So are these expensive, heavy, bulky, super tele lenses worth it? Yes. These lenses are coveted for a reason. And there is no other lenses out there that can really do what these beasts do. As I said before, you can't cheat physics. But you don't actually need one of those lenses to get started in wildlife and sports. Super zooms like this 200 to 500 or the 150 to 600s that are very popular are great lenses. And they don't come with all of the bullshit that a massive tank of a 400 2.8 comes with. And these lenses can take amazing photos as well. I've gotten plenty of great shots on this lens that I really, really, really like. Also on the used market, you can find like these 200 to 500s now, I think for €750, which for what you're getting is basically pennies for something like this. Like these lenses are now getting very cheap on the used market, and it works on the F to Z, so you can put them on your modern mirrorless and get great photos. But now the time has come in this video for me to sign off and put my beautiful 400 2.8 back to bed. $400 2.8. Fuck. So I have to check where that fucking cut out. God damn.